This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. My guest today is Ambassador Rajiv Dogra. Ambassador Dogra had an illustrious career in the IFS. He used to be India's representative to the UN in Rome and also India's ambassador to Italy. Today, we're going to talk to him about a very specific topic. He believes China is more likely to attack India than Taiwan. Why do you think so, Ambassador?
Well, I don't only think so, I've written about it. And as you know, I hope it can come in this format on your video. This is the book that I had written most recently. And
Right.
here I have not just thought, but I have asserted that China is more likely to attack, if at all it attacks anyone, India rather than Taiwan. And the reason for this is simple, that the Western propaganda would have it that Taiwan is the issue, because they are more concerned about their shipping, about freedom of sea, and also about the huge amount of commerce that passes through that area. And Taiwan is a critical source of that passage, which ensures a reasonable security for Western assets. So they are looking at it from their prism. We have to look at it from our point of view. But to elaborate it further, attacking Taiwan would not be without enormous risks. If you want, subsequently, when you proceed along with your program, I can elaborate on what those risks are. But China is not going to easily take a risk that gives it a bloody nose. On the other hand, if you look at China's large geopolitical ambitions, then the main contestant in its way is not Taiwan. Taiwan is a very small speck compared to the giant bubble in the world horizon that is China. The one which stands very close to it and which is equal in size in terms of population and nearly a competitor in terms of defense capability, that is India. That's not Taiwan. Taiwan may be industrially hugely advanced. Taiwan must be a very capable country in terms of semiconductor technology and even in terms of other defense preparedness, but it is no match in terms of population size to China or in terms of importance internationally to China, except for America and its Western allies. Otherwise, Taiwan would have had more friends and more diplomatic relations with the wider world, which unfortunately is not a fact.
Just a little bit about if this is the truth, how is India placed to tackle this truth? Because this is not widely debated in the Committee of Nations, so to speak. Everybody is very concerned about an attack on Taiwan. In fact, the Indian Foreign Minister often says that India is resigned to deal with the China issue on its own, and realizes that it may not get the support that it requires if such a war to happen again. And that's the sort of preparedness India needs. Talk to us a little bit about where we stand if such a scenario really unfolds.
Well, okay, let's go to the extreme almost immediately in the beginning of the program. Supposing a war breaks out, obviously it's going to break out in Himalayas, in Arunachal, Ladakh, and so on. Now, those places are at a very, very high altitude. Anyone, our soldiers or some other soldiers, would require a certain amount of acclimatization before they can reach those heights of 16,000 feet and above, and then be prepared for normal activity, leave aside getting engaged in a battle. So you are thinking in terms of, let's say, 10 to 15 days from level plain ground of let's say, Delhi or Chennai or Calcutta or elsewhere, on to Leh, Chishul, Pangong So, and so on. So it is between 10 to 15 days that a soldier can reach there and then start fighting the aggressor. Besides that, if someone from outside India were to come in and help, he would need machines. He would need guns, he would need tanks, he would need missiles and whatnot. Transporting that would not be a matter of hours or days. It would be a matter which is of considerable time lapse. So let's say another 15, 20 days, by which time, who knows at what stage the battle would be. So it's not practical to think that, you know, if we have a war tomorrow, then the wider world or someone in the world would send its troops and be ready to fight shoulder to shoulder with our troops. That's not going to happen. It's just not practical. It may happen, let's say, if the war prolongs to months and years, then that is a possibility. But whether we can bank on that, I think we have to be realistic on that ground.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation that the price of invading Taiwan would be very, very high and would be problematic in the Chinese mind. Talk to us a little bit about what you think that price or those prices, as it were, would be,
Well,
which effectively you're saying are a deterrent.
I'm glad you asked this question because in the last 2 or 3 years, the war, the science of war, the technology of war, and the war game has changed enormously. I think in some respects, we are seeing the same colossal change as had happened when the world was introduced to, let's say, guns, the dynamite, and then things like tanks and so on. Drones and artificial intelligence and satellite technology, which is able to pinpoint to a meter, inch, and foot the position of the enemy's soldiers, enemy's assets, and the way, the tactics, and the entire element of surprise in war has changed is enormous. Look at what is happening in Ukraine. And more recently, last week only, the way Iran has surprised not just Israel, but almost the entire Western forces, because they were able to send, I mean, there are speculative figures, but Israel admits that there were almost 350 objects, drones, missiles, cruise missiles, which came towards Israel, and some of them reached their target. Now, if you look at the pictures that were coming through, some of the cruise missiles or ballistic missiles were so controlled from Iran that they were able to evade the counter missiles, which was so tom-tommed by Israel and the rest of the world that Israel has a 5-tier defense which cannot be penetrated by any missile. Whereas these missiles, as the videos show, were able to anticipate the movement of these counter missiles and change their course. And that is remarkable. That has surprised the Western strategic thinkers also. So China knows that it is not the only one which has a majority or the most lethal weapons in the world. It knows that Taiwan has been anticipating war. It has been preparing for war for a long time, and it may have surprises by itself for China. After all, look at where Taiwan is positioned in terms of technology. It is the supplier of the best chips in the world. It is also developing missiles on its own. It's not just dependent on American technology or American weapons. So, supposing the war breaks out between China and Taiwan tomorrow, and China has the element of surprise. So, by element of surprise, I mean that America and its allies who are likely to jump in on Taiwanese side may not have the notice that a war is about to start and China is going to invade Taiwan. So let's assume that it's a total surprise. But it will not be a surprise to Taiwan. Taiwan would have a few hours notice, perhaps a couple of days notice, because it has its own intelligence setup. So China sends amphibious ships, before that, it sends fighters, missiles, and so on onto Taiwan. So, okay, those fighter aircraft and bombers and so on, and missiles do cause a lot of devastation in Taiwan. But when the amphibious ships start coming towards Taiwan via sea, after all, without having boots on ground, you cannot conquer another country. You must have boots on ground. So these ships start coming in. They would be sitting ducks for Chinese missiles. The estimate, as I've given in my book Wartime, is that 50% of that force would be destroyed. Now, that's a very large number. China does not have much regard for human lives, as is well known, but it will still have to consider the cost of that kind of devastation by Taiwan, because it would delay by that much their ability to take over Taiwan physically. Second, even if that force lands, let's say, within a day or whatever on Taiwan and starts moving towards the urban areas, Taiwan is prepared to put up a bloody fight when those Chinese invaders come in. So there will be street to street fighting, house to house fighting, and the price in human terms, or the price in terms of the invading force, would be quite high, if not impossibly high. By that time, the friends of Taiwan may decide to step in with their own resources. I mean, be it America, Australia, Japan, or whatever. Now, when more than one country is fighting against you, then despite the better experience Americans have had in Ukraine or now in Israel, the fact is that substantial force would be available to Taiwan to defend it against the Chinese aggressor. So it's not going to be a walkover, as I said. The second scenario is that Taiwan gets adequate notice. It means Taiwan and its allies or friends get adequate notice that China is going to start an aggression. In that case, some element of American forces, some element of American weapons would already be stationed on Taiwan, making things even more difficult for China. So these are the two scenarios. There are other variations that I've talked about in my book. But simply put, it's not going to be a cakewalk for China. And China knows it from the Russian experience in Ukraine. It does not want to repeat that kind of an experience, because if it gets less than a walkover, its reputation as a world power gets dented by that much. And the fear factor that it has now in Southeast Asia, at least among countries, would get reduced by that much. So there's a lot at stake for China in going in for an impulsive or knee-jerk reaction in terms of a war with Taiwan. I think the other thing that which I said earlier, and let me emphasize it once again, that we should not get in by the Western motivation, American principally, in highlighting the Pacific part, the Taiwan part, and the sea part because of their interests. For us in India, it is our mountains that are important. It is our territory that is important. It is Arunachal and Ladakh that is important. And that should be our objective.
Let me be devil's advocate and ask you this question, Ambassador. Some might say that India, attacking India too, has a lot of price, as it were, for China. One, of course, is terrain. That itself is a problem. Then India is no longer the old India, so to speak. This is something that we hear again and again. India is better prepared. India's, in a sense, its strategic mindset has shifted in some senses after Doklam. It it not only has or is building greater resources along its border with China, it is prepared to consistently do more to defend itself. You can see a strategic mindset shift even in the way we tackle Arunachal Pradesh. And the second part, China's great asset on our other border, Pakistan. Pakistan is increasingly a failing state. China's great BRI through Pakistan is in deep trouble. There's constant attacks on that process. The Balochistan has become a big problem. So, in a sense, China is more imperiled, than it obviously showcases at a day-to-day basis. Some might say, would it therefore be, such a strong argument that it might still want to take on India, even as all of these things are unfolding?
Well, I think let's split it into two questions. One
Sure.
is the China factor, the other is China Pakistan or Pakistan factor. So
Sure.
let's come to that later. But
Okay.
China factor, uh, India and Indian soldiers were prepared even in 1962, despite the fact that they went to those heights in summer clothes and very little equipment that was needed. But the fact is that our soldiers and officers put up a huge fight and a very brave fight. We were let down in 62 by wrong generals and also by wrong decisions at the political level. This also I've written in one of my books. Had Nehru authorized, I mean, I don't want to criticize Pandit Nehru, but had a political decision been taken to bring in the Air Force, things may not have been the same as they were in 62. We would have seen Chinese soldiers not advancing, but perhaps stopped at a certain point, if not made them to retreat. So we made wrong decisions at the command level and at the political level, and that is why we ended up where we were in 1962. But as far as soldier to soldier is concerned, our soldiers in subsequent little encounters have given a very good account of themselves. Even in the most recent incident where we lost 20 soldiers, immediately after that, our soldiers went up and captured the Kailash height. And they were also in other areas of strategic advantage behind Chinese soldiers. So we are militarily not a weakling. We are militarily quite capable of giving them not just a tough fight, but taking the battle into their territory. So China knows that very well. Otherwise, we would have had a fight on our hands in the last couple of years already. But that has not happened because China knows it has to calculate its chances of a victory or prevailing in a battle before it takes on India. For both China and India, uh, it suits them at the moment for both the countries that there is a stalemate that does not lead to a conflict. But in case of a conflict or a war, and here again, let me quote from wartime, there was a study done, one of the rare studies done, with regard to the chances of a low intensity conflict, and second, whether there would be a war in the next few years anywhere in the world, and India China figure at the top of that risk. So the risk is there, but it will not be easy for China. Perhaps it may have to repent that decision once it starts a war.
To Pakistan, the Pakistan factor now, as I was saying, many of China's dreams and aspirations in Pakistan are really tottering. Look at the condition of BRI, for instance. BRI connecting Gwadar to Zhangjiang was a great dream. It would cut across. It would be this great route, for China, which would, in a sense, as many have argued, and China itself, dreamt that it would be another route for them to bypass, their traditional problems and fears of traditional shipping routes. And if the Malacca dilemma, as it has been called, to overcome the Malacca dilemma, this would be their other route, right? But that's in shambles, Ambassador. Also, Baloch, nationalism is more sort of, in a sense, invigorated than ever before. Consistently, there are attacks on Chinese engineers, attacks on Chinese personnel, security personnel who are, trying to work with the Pakistanis to build this BRI. This is the whole, and above all of that, China consistently accuses Pakistan of terrible corruption, and therefore is refusing to pour in billions of dollars more into BRI in Pakistan because the money simply vanishes. This relationship is in trouble, Ambassador. How much will this relationship really deliver for China to really counter and use it as a weapon against India in the future, in any future conflict?
Well, once again, let me start with the so-called shipping side of it. Now, it is the Western interpretation that China are building this BRI route in order to have a shorter route or a second route for their oil shipments and other goods traffic. Now, that is not true. That might be the Western interpretation, but that is not the Chinese objective, nor should it be our thinking, because that would be a flawed thinking. China gains twofold by having a foothold in Gwadar. Number one, in a crisis situation with India, China would be able to control all oil supplies from Gulf onto India, because it would have the first advantage of having its military assets in a port there. The second is that China is not building BRI for any commercial reasons. That's not the objective at all. So let's forget that. In fact, that also I've explained in detail in wartime. The Chinese objective right from the beginning was strategic, that it should be able to move its forces along this, be it in a contest with India or a war with India, or for its use further down in any of the regions where America and China find themselves in a conflict situation. After all, instead of coming all the way through the Pacific or the ocean around Taiwan and so on to a fight with America or America's allies, it would be much easier to transport its vehicles down the BRI, get them to the Gwadar port and on to wherever it wants. The second thing is, purely from a commercial viewpoint, transporting oil or goods via the BRI would be at least 7 times more expensive than transporting them by ship from Kuwait or Saudi on to anywhere in China. So it's not commercial at all. The third thing is that China has built a network of satellite stations in Pakistan. One is near Karachi, the other is near Lahore. They are called Baidu satellite stations. These are military installations. Third thing is China is also covering Pakistan with a whole lot of 5G network, which gives it access as both listening posts as well as for strategic reasons. So what we have is a virtually, as they say in Hindi, a jal of China's strategic implants all over Pakistan. And that, in turn, despite all the worries about Pakistani misadventures in terms of commercial practices, that is not going to overwhelm the relationship between China and Pakistan on a strategic front. despite all the attacks against Chinese nationals in recent times, it is a worry, and China will, from time to time, push Pakistan against the wall on this particular issue. But the bigger picture is that China-Pakistan strategic relationship has too many points of interest, and those little points of irritation, China will try and resolve them instead of coming to a breaking point. The second thing is about Pakistan's internal dynamics. Of course, Balochistan has been restive for a long time, not just in recent years or recent months. And there are valid reasons for it. In fact, as you recall, at the time of independence, the Nawab of Kalat had made an offer that Kalat being the largest princely states in Balochistan, that we would like to join with India. But for various reasons, Pandit Nehru declined that offer. So Balochistan, in fact, Jinnah was the lawyer for Nawab of Kalat to advance this case that Balochistan should be independent rather than joining Pakistan. But when Jinnah became the Governor General of Pakistan, he reversed that position and said, no, let's occupy Balochistan. So Balochistan is an unfortunate case where this huge landmass, which is extremely resource rich, is supplying all the minerals and all the facilities to Pakistan, but gets very little in return except for military's jackboot. And, it has been treated very shabbily by Pakistani regimes over the years. But still, the population in Balochistan is not big enough to cause a major crisis of the Bangladesh type. And in fact, Pakistan has taken care to send in and change the demographic complexion by putting in Punjabis there. So there are problems there, and the expectation should not be that one day Balochistan is going to break away and it will happen very soon. Unfortunately, that is not likely to happen in the near future.
I want to end with one last question, Ambassador. And that question, of course, takes off from how we began. Considering all that you've told us in this conversation, what should India do in preparation? I just spoke to, for instance, former Air Marshal Arup Raha, who spoke about India's drone capabilities and was quite candid to say that while we have excellent air defense mechanisms, as far as drones and drones guided by AI and things like that are concerned, we have a lot of work to do. Now, considering what we have seen, and you began the conversation with this note, that's why I'm bringing this up. Considering what we saw in Iran's latest attack in Israel, there are all kinds of fronts that are opening up. There are some who say that if drones could do this today, perhaps there will be a bigger drone tomorrow which will be able to carry a tactical nuclear weapon. We don't know, right? I mean, there are all kinds of issues that are coming up. Now, considering all that you've told us, how prepared, in your opinion, is India, and what more should we do?
Well, I don't think I'm qualified to talk about the defense issues. Air Marshal Raha, if he pointed out that we have a lot of work to do there, I think we should go by that. But let me just add to that by saying that in drone technology or in military technology, after having witnessed what has happened over the last 2 years, starting with Ukraine and now Israel-Iran, today is already yesterday in military terms. Tomorrow has already happened. So we should not only anticipate, but we should prepare for the changes in technology and changes in tactics, which could happen over the next year and next 5 years and next 10 years. Because when war happens, you will not get the time to prepare and change your tactics. Because if you do not have, and let me also say that it is not the size of drones which has made a tremendous difference, for example, in Ukraine war. It is a small drones which were supplied by Iran to Russia, which have changed the entire complexion. And as for big drones are concerned, the Turkish drones, which caused so much havoc, they were bigger, much bigger in size than Iranian drones. Russia immediately found a counter communication means of making them impractical to be used, and in fact virtually destroying them in the air. So there are so many advances taking place on an hourly basis in military technology that we should be prepared for the worst and the most anticipated. Only then can we hope to equal and hopefully better the enemy.
How about in diplomatic terms? Are we prepared in diplomatic terms?
Well, diplomacy certainly is there, is a constant all the time. But the fact is that once the battle starts, diplomacy can take you only that far, not any further. You see what is happening in the two wars that we are talking about. You see what is happening in South China Sea when China has forcibly occupied some of the islands belonging to Philippines and threatens to occupy some of the islands belonging even to Japan. So diplomacy can take you only that far. It is the intentions and capability that are the ultimate deciders in a conflict or war situation.
So Rajiv Dogra, we leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time and for your insight into something that most people are not talking about. Could it be that China would much rather attack India than Taiwan? And what are its repercussions if such a thing would happen? Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and good luck to you. You're doing very well.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And congratulations on the book once again.
Thank you.